On the 27th of December 2015, Nigel Lim was involved in a devastating speed racing accident on Mablethorpe Beach. He was airlifted to Hull Royal Infirmary, where he was in a coma for 11 days. Doctors told his wife Julie to expect the worst. But against all the odds, Nigel, whom medical staff subsequently referred to as Miracle Man, survived, albeit with a severe brain injury and visual impairment. Further trauma, however, lay ahead. Nigel's wife Julie suffered not one but two mental breakdowns, which originated in the aftermath of Nigel's accident. So they both had to deal with life-changing, almost life-breaking incidents, which left them as people almost unrecognisable to family and friends. Their separate and joint stories of recovery bear testimony to Nigel's tiger spirit and to Julie's indomitable will, and their shared determination to live the best versions of their lives.
Once they'd MRI'd my brain and realised what damage I'd done, before I come back up to the ICU, the consultant came upstairs to Julie and took Julie into what she calls the room of doom. She knew what she was going in there for. So
that's right. So we waited for hours for this MRI scan. I think it was 6 hours, because it's really stressful for the nurses and the doctors to take somebody from the ICU, put them in an ambulance and go to the MRI, have the scan and then get them back safely. Very, very stressful time. And actually the doctor really apologised for being late, and that he'd been called to an emergency where he'd had to do another brain operation. So, and it was the registrar and the consultants were very minimum staff because it was Christmas and New Year. And although all the patients had one-to-one support 24/7, the consultants and registrars were at minimum level. So when I went into this room, and our son Michael was with us, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, obviously you don't know, but I knew that he was going to say something horrendous, and we've kind of been on edge ever since Nigel had his accident, and to hear somebody say, you know, this is the prognosis, and you know there is a chance of morbidity, and what would his wishes be, and that's, you know, you don't ever want to hear that from somebody else talking about your loved one. What would they want if? I knew that Nigel wouldn't want to live hooked up to machines for the rest of his life, and I'd had a discussion with his best friend who'd actually we discussed that the day before, you know, and he'd said to me, you know, they'd spoken about that on the way to events because motorsport's dangerous, and you know, and what would happen if, and what would you want? So I knew that it wasn't just my view, I knew it was something that he'd spoken about as well. And obviously it's a very stressful situation to be in, and I wasn't the only one. There are a lot of other families there with people in there on the same, you know, hooked up to machines, not knowing if they were going to survive or not. And then when we did on the Friday, when they said, you know, that they're giving the weekend, and I would go in every night and play music because we're massive music fans, aren't we? Yeah. And we've done a lot of gigs, so I got a little playlist, and every day I got people to bring me in t-shirts that we bought at gigs, and I would put a t-shirt on from that particular gig, and then I would play the songs from that gig to Nigel just while we were sat there, and so that was very important. That became like a ritual, and then one night as I was playing a particular song, I saw a tear come down, and I said, yeah, and I said to one of the nurses, "Oh, he's crying. This is our song." And they said, "Oh no, it's not. It's just that's secretions. That's because, you know, of everything that's going on." That I kind of knew it wasn't, but they're the professionals, so you don't say anything. And then just saw little signs, and on the Monday, he actually put his thumb up to me, and that's Nigel. I mean, he's embarrassed me all over the world, really. In posh places, like, you know, we went to a posh hotel, didn't we? Afternoon tea. I went to the bar to ask for something, and he said, I said, oh, how will you know where to? He said, it's the guy over there doing that, isn't it? Yeah. So, and he'd done that. So I knew that he was still in there. Nigel was there and his personality was there, and if he was putting his thumb up to me, there was every chance he was going to come back. They called him Miracle Man, and the doctors did cut, because from that Monday, honestly, the next few days, he was sat up, and then the first thing he did to me when he was looking at me was do this. And I said, what do you mean? Do you want a pen? And he was like, and I realised he was asking me if I was okay for money.
Oh, right.
So, and that's the kind of man that he is.
What's the next step in your story together?
Oh, the next step is that Nigel made a miraculous recovery from then. I mean, to the point he was then, all the tubes, all the drugs were being withdrawn, the tubes were coming out, because honestly I could barely get to him at first because there were so many tubes. It was hard to find a place where you could kind of kiss or whatever. And from that to then being sat in a chair next to the bed with no tubes, you know, still on the ICU, still very poorly, but able to talk and communicate, you know. And obviously we were all elated because we were expecting that we were going to lose him. And that flip from almost from death then to life again, because I hadn't slept, flipped my mind, and I began to go psychotic. The mental health team got involved, and they said, really, everything is too stressful, you need to be away from the hospital. And my family said, you need to go home, he's getting the care, he's going to be okay, go and get some rest. So that's what I did. I went home, and that was on the Wednesday, and the Thursday I ended up being sectioned.
My son didn't want to tell me where Julie was, that she was in a mental institution now, because he didn't want me to go back down again. But as that week come on, and as I was getting stronger and stronger and stronger, I was starting to ask the question where she was, because I was starting to realise then there was something
And
wrong.
you presumably were worried about her as well.
Absolutely. And then he told me where she were, and that just ripped my heart out, you know, because obviously there was a lot of realisation at that time. One of the realisations was that I'd now lost my sight, because at that time I was virtually blind with all the damage on my brain and everything. So I'd realised that I'd lost my sight. People kept saying it'll come back, because it is a symptom of brain injury, your sight loss, but it can come back, or does come back. I knew in my heart that it was never going to come back. I just had this inbuilt feeling. So I now knew that my life was going to be totally different. I didn't know what a mental institution, anything about mental institutions. I didn't know if you stopped in there forever or you came out in a week's time. I had no idea. So now my loved one, and the wife that I just married only 13 months before this accident, was now in a mental institution. And I'd realised that I'd lost everything. I'd lost my work, I'd lost my business of 27 years, I'd lost my pride, I'd lost the ability to be the man of the house, you know, to earn the living. I'd been brought up to that the man, earns a living along with the wife, but main breadwinner. I'd lost the ability to do that. I'd lost the ability to ever drive again. And what's crazy is that all these things go around in your brain at 3 million miles an hour. And only a few days before this, I'd been in a coma with massive brain swelling, and I'd suffered major brain damage, and I still suffer with brain damage. You know, it's not a scratch on the elbow. You don't get over brain damage lightly, you know. So it's quite crazy how quick my brain was working. And as I say, like Julie said, the doctors and consultants, when they came around the ward, They didn't call me Nigel or say this is Mr. Lim or Nigel. They called me Miracle Man.
The hospital that I went to were brilliant, and they were very kind people there, and they knew the background of what had happened. And also, I don't know if I don't think we've spoken about it, but 6 months previously to Nigel's accident, we'd been nursing my mum. She had a brain tumour and she'd passed away in the June. So I'd nursed her at home and given up work to nurse her at home, which I would have done for however long she'd been with us. But she passed away in the June, so we were still grieving, and I was still struggling to come to terms with that. So along with Nigel obviously having his accident, and I went in that hospital. I think it was the 8th of January, and I came home on the 26th of January because I was desperate to get home, because Nigel was due to come home on the 27th, and one of the provisions that he could come home was that there would be somebody to look after him, and the people at the hospital, they knew that I wanted to be home for them, and they were absolutely happy to discharge me so that I could come home to be here for Nigel. But we were happy to be home, weren't we?
Yeah.
But obviously it was massive. Nigel obviously struggling with his not being able to see. We didn't know at that point if his sight would come back. I kept saying, well, they'd say that in 6 months it might do.
But I still knew that.
Always said that it wouldn't come back. But we were kind of clutching at straws, I suppose.
Yeah, you do, yeah.
Was it difficult to stay that strong for each other? Because you've
We
got...
weren't strong initially, was we?
No, but we were together, weren't we?
together,
That's
yeah,
the thing.
yeah.
So, and when we were lucky that we got a close family.
Yeah.
Our children have been, so supportive through everything, and they've been there for us, haven't they?
Yeah.
But we were struggling. We thought at first, we were back home, we were together, and that was it. And I suppose we were a little bit in denial of everything that had happened. And as the weeks went on, it just became more. We thought we were getting better, weren't we? And we did appear to start getting better.
I don't think we were, was we?
No.
The onset of the realisation.
Then that sets in that our lives have changed.
Better, but equally, it was like me. Yeah, when I come out of my coma, initially when I asked about Julie to my son where she was, and he said she was in hospital, my brain didn't didn't go any further. Oh, is she all right? Oh,
because of the drugs that you were on,
but as I become more aware, that then because I was more aware, I had more things to think about, like losing my job, losing probably the house.
You don't know, because
the more aware you get, the more that can push you down.
And whatever happens, the bills still keep coming in, don't they? Nobody says, oh, you've had an accident or whatever, you don't have to pay for your electric, you don't have to pay council tax. Do you know what I mean? So
normal stresses.
The normal stresses.
Life continues.
Yeah.
But here the two of you are in a very vulnerable
position.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And growing in awareness of that vulnerability,
Yes.
even at the same time as you're both on a journey to recovery.
Yeah.
So that must incur a strange sort of mishmash of emotions as well.
And after a few weeks, when we thought we were getting stronger,
it
exploded again, and Nigel was becoming very. After initially recovering, we'd started to go down, and Nigel was becoming very dependent on me. Whereas we'd always been very doing our own thing, and but together.
Codependent.
But he was now being dependent, and we'd been in that situation where we'd helped everybody else, and now we were having to have help, and it was really alien. Really, because the kids would come to us for help, and we'd been helping my mum, obviously, and there'd been the people in between, the ones that could do everything. So not only are you having to accept help,
you haven't asked for it.
You're having to ask for help, which goes against your nature. But then Nigel becoming so dependent, and it was, I hope you don't mind me saying, do you?
No.
On constantly, and my mental health started being affected again. And on the 2nd of March, I found myself sat on the back doorstep wearing nothing but a blanket, staring at the sun, praying that I could go blind so that Nigel could see. And on the no, that was the 4th, I'm sorry, that was the 4th of March, and on that day I was sectioned again.
I was so aware now, the realisation and enormity of what had happened and what life had done to me, done to us. I wanted to kill myself, and I as a person never had them thoughts. I couldn't even understand people having them thoughts, and here I am wanting to end it all. And the only reason I didn't end it all is because I didn't have the guts to do it. If I'd have got the guts to do it, then I would have actually ended it. But I'd gone through all them thought processes, and that, it ripped your heart out. It ripped my heart out. And then of course
I didn't know any of that.
And of course Jill didn't know any of this. She's now in a mental institution again. I'm thinking.
So I wasn't really in the position to be looking after somebody.
No, and what a shame that you two were put in that difficult, traumatic position where you were both so vulnerable, and looking after each other increased each other's vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But we were trying, you see. Realised then that my mental health had gone. You'd gone out for the day with a friend, hadn't you? And because our friends as well have been really good to us. So one of Nigel's friends had come and said, we'll go out for the day. And I was here on my own. And again, I think the not relief of not looking after, that sounds horrible, I don't mean that, but the responsibility had then gone. And so I got my music on loud and I was cleaning, but then I started spiralling again. So I wouldn't let anybody into the house, and so in the end I must have let them in. I can't really remember, but that evening I remember there were 2 doctors, because it has to be 2 doctors that section you, and I can remember saying, I'm okay, I just need some sleep, and they said, and my daughter said, Mum, you really need to stop trying to look after everybody and stop taking on everyone's problems. You have to go and get some help yourself. And I said, I know I need help. And then there was somebody from the local mental health team said, you can't say that, Julie, because if you know you need help, we can't give it to you, because you're well enough to know that you need help. So if we say, do you need help, you have to say no. And my brain couldn't understand that at all. I mean, to me that's crazy, because I was asking for help. So I had to then try and work out in my brain that no, they wanted me to say no, I didn't, so then I would get the help. And I said okay, so I managed to do that. And then one of my daughters had packed me a case for a week, because I was supposed to be going for a week. So I went off with these people, and we got to, and it was hundreds of miles away, it was a different hospital. I'd asked if I was going to the same one, they said no, because there weren't any beds, which frightened me because I didn't know where I was going. And it was 10:30 at night by the time we got there. And it was cold, and they kept us waiting outside, and I can only imagine, I can describe that journey as like if you're watching a DVD and it gets stuck and then it goes back, and it gets stuck and then it goes back. I kept going back to this railway crossing, and I kept thinking, we can't get any further. And that's how the journey is in my head, and it seemed to take hours. So then they wouldn't let us in for a long time. And then when I got in there were doors slamming. And if you had sleep deprivation, any loud noise is horrendous. And I was on edge, so I remember jumping and being scared. And then the people that were with me left me, and I have to say they looked a little bit concerned. There was a bad smell everywhere, and I was thinking, this place is dirty, I don't like it. Anyway, eventually somebody came and took my details and showed me to this room, which again was filthy, and the bed, you wouldn't even
put a dog on, would you?
No, you wouldn't. And the threadbare towels, and I couldn't stay in that room. I went to sit in the corridor because there was a comfy chair, so I went to sit in the corridor and I thought, right, well, okay, I'll have to stay here tonight, but I'm sure I need to speak to my mental health team and they can get me out of here. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning before I saw a doctor, and they were very abrupt and it just wasn't a nice place. And then I thought, okay, so it's Friday, realistically I'm not going to get out here till Monday. Okay, well, I'll wait for the weekend. And on the Monday, they just didn't want to know. They didn't want to make any phone calls for me. It was very difficult to, I mean, I was poorly. They were giving me medication, which I didn't know what it was. So because I work as a support worker and I deal with meds, I know that the person's name has to be on it, has to be the right dose, it has to say when to take it, what it is. And I couldn't see any of that, and they wouldn't tell me. And so I said, I can't take that because I don't know what it is that you're giving me. And they said, oh, you've been awkward, we'll call the team. And the next thing I know, I'm frog marched down to an isolation room and injected and pushed on the floor because I've been awkward. Well, I haven't been awkward, I just want to know what medication you're giving me. So I ended up being in that place for 4 weeks and actually had to fight for my life to get out of there. I thought I would never come home again. Because they kept denying me my rights to see the doctor. He was too busy. I had to get the help of an advocate, actually, and if it wasn't for the advocate, I really don't think I'd be here. I was abused in there. I had bruises on my breasts and on my thighs, fingerprint bruises, which they'd taken photographs of, and I managed to speak to the police and make a statement while I was in there. There were, sorry.
It's okay, take your time.
You're
describing something that sounds very upsetting and distressing and must have evoked complete powerlessness in you.
Yeah, I've never felt so vulnerable in my whole life. And I know some of my behaviour was erratic. I know that I was poorly, I needed help. I know I did. But how was it so different to the first place that I was in? And some of the staff were nice, some were. But generally, I mean, I was called a loony by members of staff.
It sounds Dickensian.
Yeah, the place was.
You go in hospital to hopefully be mended, whether it's a broken leg, a broken arm, or what, don't you? Julie had a broken brain. You know what I mean? I had a broken brain from an impact hitting a piece of concrete with steel surrounding it. Julie had a broken brain from mental breakdown. You know. And another thing is, if you go in hospital, if you break your leg, you have a pot put on it, and you have all the care in the world. You get a wheelchair zoomed round and taken to the toilet and stuff. You have a mental breakdown. You still need that pot on your brain, but nobody puts a pot on your brain. All they do is treat you like, well, it's quite evident. They treat you like an animal. You know what I mean?
I didn't have a phone. I didn't have any money. I had the clothes I stood up in, and I had some decent toiletries, which I kept. They were like gold to me because they smelled beautiful, and I could try and keep myself clean because everywhere was filthy. You know, there'd be faeces on the floor in the shower, and you know, there was one cleaner. You know, and obviously when she'd done her whatever, that was it then. Since, I mean, I've tried. I've spoken to the policeman that came to see me from the special investigation, and they concluded there was no suspect could be identified. So that was that really. So then I decided that I would get an advocate because the phone was in a locked computer room which you had to ask to use. I remember once managing to get through to my mental health team saying, I'm scared for my life, I need somebody to help me, and the man said, if you're that scared, ring 999, and he put the phone down on me. So then you kind of think, well, nobody cares. I couldn't speak to my family because I didn't want them tainted with what was happening, and I didn't really want Nigel to know what was happening because he'd got enough to cope with, and my daughter had a baby while I was in there.
So
That sounds as if you're still trying to protect them all.
yes,
And to protect them from hearing about this distressing experience and life-threatening experience you felt you were undertaking. Julie, how did you come through this? How did you recover?
okay. Well, I managed to get an advocate to come, and she came on the Thursday and insisted that I saw the doctor, and she came with me to the ward round, and I agreed to be under a community treatment order, which is actually a higher section that I was on, but meant I could go home. But they had to agree to put the support in place for the local mental health team before I could come home. This was on Thursday. She said to me, "Don't agree to that, you're on a higher section." I said, "No, I need to, because I need to get home." And she said, "Okay, if you're sure." So I said, "Yes, and I'll take whatever meds. As long as I know, I'll take whatever meds." And actually my psychiatrist, who I've been discharged from now, said that they'd overdosed me because I was on 600 milligrams of quetiapine, which is massive. So I'd said yes. So that was the Thursday. So nothing happened. I knew nothing would happen that day. The Friday I asked the staff, have you rang the mental? "Oh no, we're too busy. And I kept getting stonewalled all day on the Friday. And I thought, my heart started sinking, because I thought, this is, right, okay, not going to happen again over the weekend, Monday. So I'd resigned myself to being there another weekend. The Friday night, one member of staff decided he was going to put Les Mis on the DVD, which you don't put that on. Bring him home. Do you know what I mean? And again, I was so distressed, and I could feel my mental health going down, and I really had to fight with everything that I got to keep myself positive that I was going to get out.
Because at this point, sorry for putting in, but at this point, Julie was getting back to normality in the brain.
Yeah.
But she was still incarcerated in the mental health system.
And a growing awareness
Yes.
of the injustice and the
Everything.
disempowerment.
Yes.
Again, just
Yeah.
like my brain injury,
Yeah.
as I got aware, and
Yeah.
like I was saying, the further you come up,
Yeah. I
the harder
knew.
it pushes down on you.
I knew I was in trouble that weekend, but I've made some very good friends in there, and we kind of stuck together. There were 6 of us that were really quite close. And on the Monday, when again I was stood outside the office door, knock, 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 have you phoned them? No, they're too busy. Knock, 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 have you phoned them? Well, we just changed shift. Knock, knock, knock. Oh, it's engaged. And I thought, it's not going to happen. So I managed to get into the room again and ring the advocate number, because I'm like, you know, everything, all the posts were all covered up, so I got like a little system where I could like hide things. So I phoned, and he said, "I'll be there within 10 minutes," and he was, and he came and interviewed me, and he said, "You shouldn't be in here." He said, "I'm going to get you out today," and he said, "And I've got the weight of the government behind my fist, and I'm going to use it." And I was home that night. But if it hadn't been for him, I was so scared. I said to him, "You have to make sure that the transport isn't connected to the hospital, because I can't go in anything that they put me in, because I don't know where they'll take me." I was that frightened that they would actually kill me. That's how scared I was. And he assured me that the people that were coming to get me were nothing to do. They were an independent company that were coming to get me. And they did, thank God, and they brought me home. So, and then I was home. But the horror of everything that had happened, I mean, and I came home on the 4th of April, didn't I?
Yeah.
On the Monday, that Monday. So, then we couldn't let each other go, could we?
No.
We were kind of glued together.
Yeah, but ironically, if there's an irony here, because I've been left alone, not literally alone, but you know, I was left alone for 23 hours a day in my head. I had to look after myself. I was this man that couldn't, that was asking Julie every 2
second.
minutes that put her into this situation, or
It
one of the
wasn't
reasons.
just you, darling.
I had to then look after myself. So I, against all odds, did look after myself. I don't know how I did it. I'm not saying I did it good, but I did. So when Julie came home, I now could kind of look after myself and could look after her. And what I mean about that is I was able to make a cup of tea and put toast in a toaster.
We lived on cheese on toast, didn't we, for a month?
It was so basic, but
We did.
But that basicness, I don't know, I never spoke to Julie about this, but I would think that was like, when she came home, I was like a different man, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, but the fight that you need inside your body is incredible.
So we both, I knew that Nigel's mental health was going down, and mine was because we were being kept apart and we shouldn't have been. We should have been there for each other. So we were both fighting independently to get stronger so we could come back together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The story as you tell it is incredible, that you both managed to come back from what must have been a brink on more than one occasion.
Absolutely, yeah.
And people who were less strong and perhaps less connected would have found it almost impossible to come back from those brinks, as it were, those points of breaking.
Yeah, and that's what worries me and Julie in life. You know, not everybody is as strong as me and Julie, and that's nothing, no slight on them. And like you say, with the connections, how and where are them people now? And the simple answer is, I would say they're not here.
I started writing because it was a way to release the pressure and get everything out of my head. I'd never written a book before. I'd written poetry, I'd done short stories, because everybody's got a book in them, haven't they? Really, everybody has a story to tell. But obviously now I've got all these events that I've needed to get out, and I think some people, I can understand why people cut themselves to release pressure, because it's almost like you letting it out. But rather than, that wasn't my way of letting it out, I bled onto the page. That was my way.
Julie, what comes across in a very compelling and powerful way in your writing is the description of a descent into mental health crisis, but more than that, the treatment that you received, both positively from your first section, shall we say, but very negatively your second experience, in which you felt abused, discriminated against, bullied, intimidated, but also the effect it had on other patients who were in the same environment as yourself.
We were kind of thrust together. I've always had a lot of friends and been able to make friends easily and talk to people, but when you're in that situation you have no choice, and there are certain people that you resonate with and become close to because you're thrust into that environment, and it's almost like they become your surrogate family while you're there, the people that you can confide in, and we had each other's backs and we supported each other, and there were instances of theft and bullying and, new people coming in, that one particularly was stealing from other residents, so we kind of banded together because the staff didn't appear to be, they would pick on the certain people that they always picked on, that were causing trouble when perhaps they weren't there at that particular moment. So in that respect, we clung to each other really, because we were all away from our families. I mean, I don't know exactly what everybody else's issues were, because I think you become very selfish, I suppose, because you're so wrapped up in your own misery that you don't perhaps see what's going on with other people. Without a doubt, this was it was the worst experience of my life, because I was so vulnerable and preyed on by people who should have been looking after me. I was at the most vulnerable that I'd ever been in my whole life. Each week, each month, each year that goes by, we're doing more and more. And when you look back, even from 6 months ago now, because it's 3 years, we've come so far in those 3 years. We're unrecognisable. In fact, we are back now to how we were before the accident. So we're doing all sorts of things. Nigel does a lot with his volunteering with the Blind Society, with temping bowling. He's been back on his motorbike. I very quickly started back at work supporting. I started back in the July of the year when I came home. Wrote my book starting in the April. I'd finished it by the end of June. Got it published in the October 2016. Then had it republished again October 2018 with the publisher. Back at work, run my own business now. I do holistic therapy. I have a health and wellness business. we both like exercise, don't we?
Yeah.
I've just started going running. I do Zumba. I've just started doing couch to 5k, and actually now we're hoping to run this place as a retreat. That's what we're talking about now, and so everything is all coming together.
And for you, Nigel, what has the progress that you've made meant to you? Because I understand you have been back on your bike, you've got more plans for the future. Yeah. Would you like to tell us a little bit about getting back?
Because I've got a lot of friends, like Julie said, we've got a lot of friends and people that care about us. I'd always been offered, any time I wanted to ride a speedway bike again, I could do it. And obviously the last thing I needed to do was ride a speedway bike. They've got no gears. I mean, the adage is, if you fall off an horse, get back on it. Well, I got back on the horse, but the horse I got on was a wild Mustang, and I was bareback. Because a speedway bike is a pure racing bike, no gears, or one gear should I say, no brakes, runs on methanol, it's an animal. So I've been offered this and I said no. And but before that, because one of the first things you lose with brain injuries is balance. Well, I got a push bike in the garage and I kept seeing it in my garage, and I said to myself, Nigel, can you ride that push bike? So I sat myself on it, and we've got a long drive. So I sat on it and it felt comfy, and I pedalled it, and I pedalled 3 times and I didn't fall off, so I carried on going. So I knew that I'd got the natural balance back. So that, if I hadn't got the balance, I couldn't have done it. So anyway, last October, I was sat on the settee, I had a message, Nigel, do you fancy riding a speedway bike? So I was sat next to Julie, and I had enough confidence, and I said, how would you fancy me riding a speedway bike again? Because obviously this is what took our ordinary life away. And she said straight away, without hesitation, if you want to do it, do it.
Do it.
So I messaged this chap and said, when can we do it? And about a week later, which is the 7th of October, I was at Eddie Wright Speedway track at Scunthorpe, riding somebody else's wild animal, not even my own wild animal. And I did it, and it felt quite normal. And then that led me to think, right, you can do another thing now, Nige. If you ride at the beach where you had the accident, that's going to get rid of a demon. So I put that into place, and I rode the bike there, and I went better than I thought. I went faster than I thought, and yeah. But just putting that into perspective. When I get frightened to catch a bus, every time I catch a bus, I get frightened because I've got to walk down here to catch the bus. Am I going to miss the bus? Am I going to get on the right bus? All I do now is, Nige, you've rode a speedway bike round a track.
You can catch a bus. You
can catch a blinking bus, surely to God. So I now put that into my rehabilitation of anxiety. And that is snowballing. And from the ride at the beach, Paul Garber, who runs the Race the Waves at Bridlington, he invited me as a guest rider to come up there. So I'm doing that in June. I'm riding up there on my own 1961 Triumph. There's several other things that
in the pipeline.
And I never count my chicks until they've hatched. But yeah, there's several other things in the pipeline, and I'm just excited for the future.
You have experienced individually and together some of the scariest things that could happen to a person. And yet the total of that experiences have led you to refuse to lead a fear-based life. And to make huge strides so that you don't get overwhelmed by the fears that you could be overwhelmed by.
It's not been easy.
It doesn't stop that from happening because, there's
and it's a constant work in progress, isn't it? It's not stepping into a future of happy ever after and rainbows.
No.
It's actually a daily task for each of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's been marvellous speaking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
She swirled like a spirit, ballerina in silk and frills. Flames burst out her chest, crowd others circling higher. Oh, will you see her then? The light inside